along with slides, resources, and any other recordings from our past webinars on our website, which is up on the screen now. And I will now pass it over to our coordinator, the co-chair or moderator today, the co-chair for the Alliance Healthy Food Systems Working Group, Naomi Billups. She is the Public Health Nutrition Manager for the County of San Diego. Naomi has been instrumental in the food systems in San Diego through assisting the establishment of the San Diego Food Systems Alliance, designing and managing the implementation of the Food Systems Communities Putting Prevention to Work, Community Transformation Grant, and Prevention Interventions, and is the program lead for the Sodium Reduction Grant. And I know you'll be able to learn a lot from Naomi and her procurement efforts at the end of this webinar during our discussion. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Naomi.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Alliance. This is the third webinar in the Nutrition Track series on drought. This is a really important issue for everybody concerned with public health and a healthy regional food system. We're really excited that this is going on, and I know that we're going to be able to learn a lot from each other during this hour. I just wanted to go over the agenda. We're going to be hearing from two experts in the field, but really this is going to be our opportunity to learn what each other have been doing in this area, really look at our challenges and barriers and brainstorm some solutions together, and hopefully even come up with some action items that we can move collectively forward. And then we'll have a pretty deep Q&A discussion to do that. But we do want to have dialogue throughout. So I wanted to introduce our first speaker, Kari Hammerschlag, who is a senior program manager with the Food Technology Program at the Friends of the Earth, which she's going to talk a little bit about. She carries out research and implements market and policy campaigns aimed to reform animal agriculture, reducing consumption of factory-farmed animal products, and promoting healthy, fair, and sustainable food and farming systems. Prior to Friends of the Earth, she worked for 5 years as a senior analyst with the Environmental Working Group, where she did research and advocacy on a wide range of food and agriculture issues, including the U.S. Farm Bill, GMOs, climate change, organic agriculture, food security, and conservation policy. Kari has done extensive research on the links between food production and climate change, and was the lead author on a comprehensive web-based Meat Eater's Guide to Climate Change and Health. So we're really excited to have Kari join us. Our next speaker is Becca Klein, who is an organization development and food systems consultant. She helps people take on ownership of their role in human systems, guides effective change management, and works with teams to foster an understanding of how all members can contribute to the group's dynamics. She's especially interested in supporting those who are engaged in food systems, and has worked over a decade in public health, and most recently as a senior program officer with the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, where her work is focused on improving federal food policy and agriculture through coalition building, policy analysts, and advocacy. Her clients have included the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders, Healthy Food Action, and the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and Friends of the Earth. So welcome.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to show my screen here. Thank you so much, Naomi. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today. And as Naomi mentioned, I work with Friends of the Earth, which, if you don't know, is the U.S. voice of the world's largest federation of grassroots environmental groups. We have a presence in 74 countries around the world, and our broad mandate is to work to defend the environment and champion a more just and healthy world, including our food system. So Becca and I are really excited to talk to you all today about the impacts of diet on the environment, and particularly on our water resources, and to share findings of the scientific report on the nation's dietary guidelines, which for the first time suggested that we need to consider the impact of diet on the environment in developing our nation's dietary guidelines. So Becca will be sharing the latest political developments on that from DC after I present. So I really hope that the information that we share with you today can help spark some new ideas for how you might integrate environmental factors, particularly issues around water, into the work you're doing, nutrition education or food purchasing, or the development of procurement guidelines for counties or school districts. So as everybody knows, our water resources are in serious trouble. You know, an unprecedented drought and very hot weather is putting our country's most productive agricultural regions under tremendous water stress, both in California and in the Midwest, where much of California's animal food crops are grown. So in California, our water supply is at an all-time low, and our groundwater resources have been massively depleted by unlimited water pumping. So the bottom line here is that we are depleting our freshwater resources far more rapidly than these supplies can be replenished. And you know, when the groundwater runs out, it's really gone for good. And refilling the aquifer takes hundreds, if not thousands, of years of rain. And so with the acceleration of climate change, we're only going to have less, not more, water available for our food system and for agriculture. So what does this all mean about our role as educators and advocates in the food system for helping solve this problem? That is one of the questions I want to be answering today. So if you're like me, you might be using your shower and dishwasher you might be using your shower and dishwater to water your plants or take shorter showers. You know, there's signs everywhere about conserving water. This one is from my pool shower. And when you go to a restaurant, they might ask you, you know, if you want water on your table and not serve it to you automatically. But then, you know, you order a steak, and no one actually mentions the fact that they could pour more than 7,000 glasses of water with the water it took to produce that quarter-pound of steak. They also don't mention that if you ordered a quarter-pound of burger, that's really like taking 8 showers or 5 days of your indoor washing activities. So you may know the governor has issued mandatory reductions in water use for cities and towns across the state. But one huge issue, water, is often left out of the conversation. So often when we're talking about water conservation, we do hear about almonds, but in terms of kind of state policy and kind of signs around the pool, it's all about direct water use. I hope this conversation today will really elevate awareness that the solution to our water crisis needs to include a shift in our dietary patterns along with better water conservation practices, so that one day we might be able to see this sign. It's just fascinating to me that we all feel really comfortable asking people to limit your showers or to limit watering your lawn, but we really don't feel that comfortable asking people to change their diet. And so I think that's kind of the paradigm shift that we need to be working towards. So you may be, and the reason why is this slide here. So this is California's water footprint. On average, we use about 1,500 gallons a day. The average Californian uses about 140 gallons of water per day for drinking, bathing, washing clothes, things like that. That's called direct use of water. But that's only a very small part of the story, as you can see in this slide. A lot more of the water that you consume is used to produce the goods we consume, including the food we eat, the clothes we wear, etc. And that's what's called the water footprint, the amount of water that's consumed to produce a product. So as you can see in this slide, more than 90% of California's water footprint is associated with agricultural products. And meat and dairy, in particular, have especially large water footprints due to the amount of water-intensive feed that's required to raise the animals. So more irrigation water goes, for example, into corn than any other American crop. And most of that corn is grown in regions with extremely high water stress. So I just want to be clear that this slide is different than the water used in our state to produce various crops, since this is really, our water footprint includes all of the products that we consume from other states. So just in general, agriculture uses about 70% of total water. About a quarter of global fresh water goes to animal feed. And in California, that's 80% of California's water goes to agriculture. And keep in mind, demand in 2030 for food based on current consumption trends is expected to be 40% greater than what current accessible and reliable water supplies can provide. So we have a serious issue about how we're going to feed everyone given the limited water. So where is California's water actually going? You can see in this slide that a quarter of California's precious and rapidly declining water supply is actually going to crops that are fed to animals. And much of that is going to produce alfalfa for dairies and some corn and hay for beef production as well. And then, of course, you know, and there's no doubt that this water would go much further if it were used to irrigate nutritious plant proteins such as legumes or healthy vegetables like broccoli, which of course most Americans fail to consume at adequate levels. So what does this all mean for the water footprint? And I'll just note, you can see rice is also a really big one that doesn't get a lot of attention actually. Almonds get all the attention. Rice really should get more attention in California because that's 20% for one single crop. That's definitely the biggest water user in the state in terms of one single crop. So what does this all mean for water footprint? Well, when it comes to animal protein, you can see the water footprint is largely determined by what animals eat, and the beef is far above the rest of them in terms of using a lot of water. Typical burger uses about 500 gallons of water. The same amount of chicken, considerably less, just 130 gallons. But lentils and beans are, of course, the best. You can see 120. So you may be asking kind of, well, what about from a protein standpoint? So if you look at it from a protein perspective, the veggie protein looks even better since it takes about twice as much water to produce a gram of chicken protein as it does to produce a gram of lentil or bean protein. So this is kind of by protein. So you can see here that almonds do stand out as a high water per protein, have a high water per protein ratio here. And I was asked to just say a few words about almonds because they really have gotten so much attention in the media in California. And I really think they've gotten a terribly bad rap, honestly. You know, it's true that on a per gram of protein basis, they do require more water than beef, but it's really important to keep in mind the bigger picture here, which is that, you know, how many almonds do most people eat? Like, they eat a small quantity of almonds a day maximum. I mean, vegetarians eat more, but it's a pretty small amount, and that doesn't really add up to a lot of water compared to the daily consumption of meat and dairy, which is where you have your big footprint. Also, you know, almonds are a high-value crop compared to, say, alfalfa or hay, which consume more of California's water. So they're really important for California's economy. The bottom line is that given the large quantities of water that go into animal ag production, shifting diets away from animal products and reducing demand for these water-intensive foods is absolutely key to conserving water and other natural resources so that we have the ability to feed future generations. You know, it's really quite simple. We have a shrinking water base. Animal products use a lot of that water, and so we need to reduce. And this is really not just an environmental. I mean, there's lots of environmental benefits, but this is not really just an environmental issue. This is a food security issue. And we're going to, you know, with the acceleration of climate change, we're only going to have less, not more water available for the production of these water-intensive foods. So, you know, during the next 10 years, the depletion of groundwater supplies in some ag areas will really directly affect people's ability to afford and access healthy, nutritious food. And so this situation will be much better if we can reduce the pressure on water resources by producing fewer animal products. And also, it's really important to keep in mind that it's really a win-win-win to reduce meat and dairy consumption. There's a strong body of scientific evidence that shows that a diet with less meat and more plant-based foods is better for our health, better for our pocketbooks. Heavy meat consumption, especially red and processed meat, is associated with increased risks of heart disease, diabetes, and cancers, while plant-based diets are associated with decreased risks of all three of those. And it's very costly. The chronic preventable diseases that are associated with high meat diets cost a lot. Just heart disease and stroke is $315 billion in 2010. So a shift towards more plant-based foods will save the nation billions of dollars in healthcare costs. So I think there's a lot of reasons. And also, as you all probably know, Americans consume significantly more meat than is recommended by USDA guidelines. Far more than the rest of the world. We eat somewhere between 4 and 6 ounces a day. Most of that is red and processed meat, which is associated with these chronic diseases. USDA dietary guidelines, I think, suggest 2 ounces, a little less than 2 ounces of red meat per day. And then on top of that, of course, fewer than 20% of Californians actually get the fruits and vegetables they need. So that's so we need to in order to fill up our plates with fruits and vegetables, we need to move the meat off, to the side. So now there's one more reason. This drought gives us all one more reason to reduce our meat and dairy. And if we're talking about big institutional purchasing, food service can save money if they do this, and they can also reduce the risks in their supply chain by switching to plant-based proteins, because animal foods are going to become more and more expensive, and also will face some shortages over time. And so I just want to quickly mention about food waste, because reducing food waste is also critical to saving water. Roughly 30% of our food ends up in the garbage, and all that water that was used to produce that food also ends up in the garbage. And so that's 25% of all the fresh water consumed annually in the U.S. is associated with the food that's thrown away, which just breaks my heart. And it's not just water, of course. All of the inputs that go into agriculture, the pesticides, the fertilizers, all the greenhouse gas emissions, all of that is for naught, because it all gets thrown away. And so we're, I can't say enough about how important it is to address the food waste issue for all of these. So before I turn it over to Becca, which I'm going to do in a minute, I just want to say a word about the fact that, production methods in how food is grown really does matter when considering impacts on water resources, both in terms of quantity of water and water quality. So reducing meat and dairy consumption is critical, as I've said. But if you do eat meat and you do recommend meat, I also want to stress the importance of buying and recommending better and more sustainable, certified organic, humane, and ideally pastured animal products, which are better for your health and better for the environment. And I know immediately you're thinking, yeah, but it's so expensive. We work with low-income populations. Public money we don't have that much money. But really, when people for food service operations buy less meat, they can afford better meat that's been raised on pasture or raised organically without the use of antibiotics, hormones, synthetic pesticides, and chemical fertilizers. So I'm just going to say a quick word about why it is that meat and dairy produced this way is better for the environment. Basically, well-managed grazing helps to build healthy, fertile soil that sequesters carbon and increases the moisture-holding capacity of the soil, especially in this time of increasing drought. This is so important. So it also, unlike industrial livestock operations, grass and pasture-based systems don't require extra water for grain production, as they are mostly consuming the rain-fed grasses that are already growing in the field. Although in California right now, that's definitely not the case. I mean, we have to do irrigated pastures in some places, and in some places it's just you're going to be shipping in hay that's raised with water. But But there is less water use in these systems. So you're not putting as much pressure on the irrigation systems. And they also generate much less water pollution, which is really important. We're not talking too much about water pollution today, but the animal waste that's deposited on pasture becomes a potent source of organic nourishment for soils and crops as opposed to a source of pollution as it is on the big factory farms in the Central Valley where, tons of problems with nitrates in the water because of all of the pollution from the animal waste. So basically, organic and well-managed pasture-raised meat and dairy, while they're better alternatives for health and the environment, they do require more land than factory farm meat, and they still consume large amounts of resources. So especially compared to plant-based proteins. So no matter what kind of meat we choose to eat, eating less is really key to a healthier planet. So I'm going to pass this over to Becca now, and then I'll come back with just a couple of recommendations before we get into the question and answer. Oh gosh, I forgot.
Thank you, Kari.
Okay.
So hopefully you all can see my screen now. Thank you, Kari. That was a great overview. Again, my name is Becca Klein. I've been delighted to work as a consultant with Friends of the Earth on their Sustainable Diets program, especially around the Dietary Guidelines process. I'm just going to talk really briefly about the general process of how the Dietary Guidelines get created, and then what's been going on politically, some efforts to impact what's been going on politically, and then a little bit about what you can do moving forward to help influence this as well as to help improve diets and the environment. And then I'll turn it back to Kari. So as most of you know, the Dietary Guidelines are put out by the federal government. It's a joint effort between the Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They're done every 5 years, and a committee is appointed by USDA and HHS to review the latest literature. And this is a group of scientific experts who spend 18 months reviewing the literature with a robust scientific process, and they completed that in February of this year. The report was released, and now it is up to the USDA and HHS to write what they call a policy document, but it's basically the guidelines that will be coming out for all of us to look to and use in programming. Now, what was really exciting about this scientific report that we're going to call it the DGAC, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, put out was that they recognized what Kari was just talking about, that diets that are higher in plant-based foods and lower in animal-based foods are not only better for the environment, but they're better for our health. Or not only better for our health, but also better for the environment, that the two are linked and we really cannot separate them. I've included a few quotes from the report here for you to peruse later when these slides are available. I'm not going to read these to you now. But I just want to pull out a few key phrases. So we're talking about human health and sustainability together. We're talking about the availability and acceptability of healthy and sustainable food choices, that both of those need to be impacted in order to make a difference for mentioned. There's going to be growing demand for food. Food security really is the most fundamental part of nutrition, and then once we have food, then we can talk about what kind of food we have access to and whether or not it's nutritious. But without those basic calories, we really don't have nutrition. What we want to see moving forward is a diet that supports both our health and the resilience of our resources to produce that food into the future. So unfortunately, not everybody wants to see that. There are folks in the meat industry, in the grain industry, and others in the food industry who profit from our current industrialized agriculture system and from the way that Americans on average eat. And so there's been a lot of spin on this fantastic report that came out from the committee that has been trying to debunk the quality of the science, to debunk the expertise of the researchers who were part of that expert committee, when in reality it was one of the most state-of-the-art, robust systems for analyzing the literature based on a medical model, and that really we can look to this report as a trusted resource. And not only that, but really this is an idea, it's not just an idea, but a necessity whose time has really come. And there are those in the media who are paying attention and who are helping to tell the story of what needs to happen. So when the report first came out, there was a lot of back and forth of whether or not should the USDA make these recommendations or should they not. And as I said, there's been a lot of push back against this. There were 30 senators who wrote a letter to the USDA and HHS saying that the science wasn't valid and that, that people need to be eating meat for their health and a whole range of things. We can provide links to those letters as part of the resources page will be available in association with this webinar. And then at the same time, there's also been a huge effort to show the overwhelming public support that does exist for these changes. So not only is there public support, but as we said, the scientific support is there. And so Friends of the Earth, in partnership with other organizations like the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future and the Center for Biological Diversity, has been leading an effort to bring together health groups and environmental groups and animal welfare groups and people who really understand this connection between our diets and the environment and who want to see this change happen. So there was a letter that we put together from 49 public interest groups right when the report was released to show our support for the report. And then we put together with a range of partner organizations, about a dozen were involved, a petition in support of the recommendations, and there were over 153,000 people who signed to that. And that, in comparison, the meat industry had a petition that got just over 2,000 signatures for a petition around hands off my hot dog. So really there is huge public support for this. And not only that, Friends of the Earth and others were involved in helping an effort called MyPlateMyPlanet that garnered signatures from over 100 organizations and prominent experts. And now that list is over 150 strong. And this is really, it's really important not only for the issues, but it was the first time that these groups all came together to stand together in alliance around an issue like this. And MyPlateMyPlanet supported some advertisements in some major newspapers, the New York Times and Politico and the Washington Post, to really show both our policymakers and the public that this support exists. And then we also helped to organize a letter from over 700 doctors and other health professionals, including nutritionists, registered dietitians, in support the medical profession. More and more is coming around to understand the importance of what their patients are eating and the astronomical healthcare costs that, as well as, not to mention, most importantly, the lost lives and lost enjoyment of life that happens when people are not eating well. So there's been this groundswell of support, most impressively in terms of the comments, the public comments that went in to USDA on the DGAC report. There were over 29,000 comments, and that is in comparison to, I think it was around 2,000 5 years ago. So we're really looking at a public who's paying attention, who's tuned in, who wants to see these changes happen. And not only for themselves, but most importantly for our future generations. And you see this picture of this gentleman here. This is Dr. David Katz of Yale University, and he said this quote in one of his pieces, which I will read because it really sums it up for me, the importance of this. He said, "If we don't keep sustainability as one of our own priorities, we are eating at the expense of the planet. We are eating at the expense of the generations to follow us. We are, in other words, eating our children's food and drinking our children's water along with our own." So hopefully that inspires you all to want to do something about this, to stay engaged. I'm sure you already are doing things about this if you've tuned into this webinar. And so I'm going to mention a few things that you can do, and then I'm looking forward to our discussion to hear other things that you're already doing or ideas that you have of what else can happen. So one of the things that needs to happen is that our elected officials need to understand the importance of the science that's backing the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's recommendations. USDA and HHS have not put out their final report yet. It's due out by the end of this year, and there's still an opportunity potentially to influence in a positive way USDA and HHS in what they write. Likely, the sustainability considerations may not make it in the report, but there's a very good chance that at least some sort of recommendation around less meat and more plants will make it in, because there's very, very strong science that especially red and processed meat, as Kari mentioned, not only has a range of health negative health impacts, cancer, heart disease, and even potentially obesity. So your elected officials need to hear from you, and so one of the questions is, do you within your office have a process to educate your elected officials, whether it's about these issues or other issues important to your work? You can do things as a professional, like write letters to the editor about the importance of the dietary guidelines and the importance of this science to your work. But more than that, just because whatever comes out at the end of this year as the 2015 dietary guidelines, that doesn't mean that we can't, as health professionals, go above and beyond and use the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's report sort of as a toolbox to turn to. It's an excellent summary of the latest research that really tells us what we can and should be eating, not only to improve our health, but that of the environment. And one of the best ways to start to change the way people eat, or one of the biggest places for impact, as Kari mentioned earlier, is food service and food service guidelines. So I'm just going to mention one more thing, which is that there are federal food service guidelines around health and sustainability that were released in 2011, and those are up there's a request for information out about those right now, which I will show you. I'm going to skip over this quote. You can come back to this, but this is more about how we need to impact our production practices, and that procurement is one way to impact those. But you will have a link to this website in the resource part of the webinar, and this will show you that it's open until September 15th, this opportunity to comment to the General Services Administration and the CDC worked on these together in 2011 based on the 2010 dietary guidelines, and they're renewing them. They do talk about sustainability, but they mostly talk about sustainability in terms of energy use, in terms of recycling, in terms of composting. They do mention food waste, but they could be a lot stronger in their recommendations about what kind of meat to serve, what kind of dairy to serve, how much to serve, and then also to really emphasize the food waste issue. So if you're in a position to submit a comment, maybe you've been working on food service guidelines or food service changes, they would really like to hear from folks who are either using their guidelines or using other guidelines and have thoughts and recommendations of how they can improve their current guidelines. So I highly encourage you, if you have time and ability before September 15th, to put in a few comments. So thank you. Turn it back to Kari now.
I think Kari's going to also give us some takeaway action items as well as Becca did. Kari, are you on?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm here, yeah, I want to go really quick because I see the time is going, and I would really like to hear the conversation discussion. So I'm going to skip over these real quick and just highlight a couple of things here. One is the promotion of good food purchasing policy. So clearly, we can all reduce pressure on our water resources and have positive environmental health benefits by making different choices about what we put on our plate each and every day. and educating others on this. So one of the key ways to influence a lot of people is through these purchasing guidelines, good food purchasing policies. And I know many of you are working on procurement policy, and I want to highlight the good food purchasing policy that the LA Food Policy Council developed in 2012 in conjunction, with support from the LA County Public Health Department and the Mayor's Office. And it's really quite a model for other cities, and it does include mention of, it covers 5 different areas. So it's one of the most comprehensive procurement policies out there, covering local economies, sustainability, workforce, fair food, animal welfare, and nutrition. And within the environmental sustainability principle and within the nutrition principle is an emphasis on minimizing foods of animal origin and reducing meat consumption. And so using these good food policy guidelines is one way to kind of incorporate issues around all these different issues we've been talking about, but specifically focusing on the reduction of meat consumption. Another really important, and I should say that there's work being done right now through a new initiative, the Center for Good Food Purchasing, to help bring these guidelines to other districts. And I know in California they're working with Ventura, San Diego, Long Beach, and Oakland. I also want to just mention plant-based proteins. Really important to bring the message about conserving water into any educational work you might do around food choice, and let people know what a big difference it makes. And you can see, I'm not suggesting here, you can see all these plant-based proteins, yummy foods that have a very low water footprint. And I'm not suggesting here that we're encouraging people not to eat meat or cheese or dairy, but I think that the message here is just to incorporate many more plant-based proteins into your meals and reducing the amount of meat on the plate, meat and dairy on the plate, and of course making it better meat and dairy when you do choose it. So I think that's really the message. It's smaller portion sizes. If everybody just halved the amount of meat and dairy they consume, it would free up so many water resources that could be, preserved and conserved for the future. So I think that's where we can have a big impact on smaller portion sizes. Another thing that can be done, and then of course the waste issue, which we talked about already. Another thing that can be done is promoting Meatless Mondays. All of these towns and cities have been promoting Meatless Mondays. In California, over 100 school districts, universities, and hospitals have been incorporating Meatless Mondays, where basically they either put more veggie option meals on the menu, or they literally just take meat off the menu for the day. Oakland and LA, both Oakland and LA Unified School Districts take meat off the day on Mondays, and it's a very powerful way to have a big impact and educate kids about these issues. And then there's also climate action plans that are also incorporating reducing meat consumption as part of cities and counties' efforts to reduce their climate impacts. So I think we should move on to the questions now. I'd love to hear in comments and ideas and hear from you. There's a bunch of resources that you can look to. Meatless Mondays has great recipes. Menus of Change has fabulous principles around healthy, sustainable food purchasing. I'd definitely take a look at that. And then Friends of the Earth UK has a great resource guide with all kinds of fun ideas about how to promote more plant-strong diets. So look forward to hearing what you all have to say now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Becca. This is Naomi. I just I valued all the information and look forward to our discussion that we're going to have. So I'd like to open it up to the folks on the line to start either asking some questions or starting our brainstorming session to look at what we can do as local health departments and improve the food systems in our areas.
Great, and thank you, Naomi, and thank you to those wonderful presenters. This is Holly, and I do want to note we did mute a few folks due to background noise. So if you are one of those people and you want to come back onto the audio, you can raise your hand or send us a chat, and we'll go ahead and unmute your line for you. And one thing that we did want to get feedback on from everybody was around the procurement policies. I know a lot of folks have been working on procurement policies in their counties, so we did want to get a read from folks. We're going to do a quick poll here. And I will open it up. Does your county have an established procurement policy for institutional purchasing?
Or for city, maybe. Or for city.
Or for your city. Thank you. Good point. For your jurisdiction. And we'll leave this up for a minute and let folks get some, do some input. And we did have a number of questions coming in through the Q&A feature as we went, as your presentations went along. So there were a couple questions regarding the scientific basis for the studies around decreasing meat consumption and wondering why the focus is on meat as opposed to a product like sugar. So I think sugar is probably something that many folks working on nutrition have experienced doing messaging around. So could you give us some insight as to where sugar falls on that spectrum of the water footprint regarding diet?
That is a really good question. Sugar? I have to get back to somebody on that. I'm not sure about sugar.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
In terms, one comment I'll make, this is Becca, is it's a little easier culturally for us to talk about changing the amount of sugar we eat or how much sugar is in our diets. Kari can get back to us maybe about the water impact of sugar, but in terms of why we aren't mentioning it necessarily is that we're talking about this major shift that needs to happen, as you could see from Kari's slide, with that has over 40% of meat and dairy being accounted for the water use. And there's a cultural shift that needs to happen to move meat to the side of the plate or some days off the plate. Same with dairy, both for our health and then also for the long term. It's not even just our own nutrition security, but we're also talking about job security for America's farmers. And so it's really important that we start paying attention to this issue. And I think that the vast majority of the country has started to pay attention to sugar, but not as much to the meat and dairy issue.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can I make a comment on that?
Yes, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so just connecting the dots, I guess, is looking at the Farm Bill, because sugar is one of those crops that is heavily subsidized, and it kind of goes along with other crops like alfalfa and things and corn, that go to feed our meat production. So it kind of goes back to looking at the Farm Bill as like, why are we supporting this bill that creates more sugar and more meat, which is very unsustainable and unhealthy. So it's interesting to see if we can come together, whether we're local cities or counties, and maybe petition against, the Farm Bill, I guess, with a little more weight and a little more passion. I don't know.
Who is speaking? Can everybody identify themselves? Sorry,
this
if
is
you did, I didn't hear you.
James Marin.
From?
Oh, sorry. From San Bernardino County Department of Public Health.
San Diego. Great. Yeah, I'll just say real quick, I've done a lot of work on the Farm Bill, and we've made, in the last two Farm Bills, we really have pushed hard on the fact that our food and farm policy is completely out of alignment with current dietary recommendations. We promote fruits and vegetables. Half of our plates should be fruits and vegetables, but really a very tiny, tiny percentage of all the support from the Farm Bill is going to fruits and vegetables, and most of it goes to subsidies that are going to animal feed crops. And then, of course, we have sugar support in there as well. So it's totally true. And I really hope that next Farm Bill, we're going to be able to engage more public health departments in this debate. That would really help. I think it could really help move California legislators to weigh in more heavily against all the subsidies in the Farm Bill.
That's great, Kari. And I'll just add that in part of this discussion, the Secretary Vilsack, the head of the USDA, has been saying, you know, we care about sustainability at USDA, but the dietary guidelines is not the place to have this conversation, and we would like to have this conversation, and we do have this conversation, but in other venues. And so just what Kari said about health departments getting more involved, I think we need to be pushing to have a comprehensive conversation and not these siloed conversations.
That's great. Thank you. And go ahead. I see somebody else is about to chime in. Or perhaps that's a little bit of background music. So I'm going to take, or background noise, sorry. I'm going to take a minute to go ahead and share the results from our first poll. So it looks like most folks either have a procurement policy in place, are in the process of developing one, or would like to develop one, or they don't know. So that looks like a great, it looks like people are on track. I'm happy to see that people aren't just not interested in that. Along those lines, I think probably a number of folks have procurement policies that address nutrition. So we're curious to see how many folks have procurement policies that are also touching on aspects of sustainability. So kind of picking up on that conversation of looking at how guidelines and what how we're influencing through procurement and institutional buying can connect with sustainability. So we heard from Kari about the Good Food Purchasing Pledge. I'm curious if other folks have sustainability incorporated as well. Becca, you talked a little bit about the sort of cultural sensitivity around meat and how that's a tougher conversation for a lot of folks to have. That came in the Q&A looking at dairy specifically, how that's for many folks not a culturally appropriate food, and yet school meals give out milk, much of which goes into food waste, which then contributes to the loss of water through wasted food that Kari, you mentioned.
Wow.
Could you talk about any, that issue, and if there are any efforts on giving more options for students to have something other than dairy with their meals?
It's interesting, that issue. It kind of hits a little bit the nail on the head of how the dairy industry has such influence over over decisions in Washington. And there really is a very big dairy lobby that's pushed hard to get more dairy foods into school meals. And I think there is, I'm not an expert on this, and maybe Becca knows more about efforts really to get more vegetarian and vegan options into school meals and more culturally appropriate foods. And I do think that the trend is going in the right direction on that. And I don't have details, but I think these are also kinds of issues that parents and health promoters and others connected with the schools, I think, have a role to play, because you can influence what is put on the menus there by engaging with the school on nutrition policy and food policy. There's ways to influence that. So I think that's I hadn't really thought about the waste that comes from serving so much milk to people who don't drink that, and that's just a huge environmental impact right there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kari. I don't have an expertise around that with school lunches. I have heard bits and pieces here and there of efforts to try to change it a little bit, and I can look into it a little more and speak with some of my colleagues and hopefully have an answer by the time the resources are put up on the webpage with this. But that also highlights one of the things that makes agriculture and food and diet so complicated is the complex system that it takes to both produce the food and get to our plates. And one of the reasons that milk is part of the lunch, in addition to it being assumed to be very nutritious, is that oftentimes our dairy farmers need a financial support, and the dairy industry pushes and gets it for them. And at a national level, the United States Department of Agriculture buys all this extra milk and then makes it available through school lunch. And what we really need to see is local health departments and other local and state efforts to partner with the agriculture in your region to create more localized and regional systems of delivery, systems of like food hubs where aggregation can happen so that the channels for the food that we want to see people getting, the channels for those food to actually end up in the cafeteria exist. Because one of the things we're really missing is a system that allows our farmers to succeed financially.
This is
Can we oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to ask if we could go back to the procurement policy discussion a little bit. I'd love to hear from people what is going on in your regions around that, and if you see that as an opportunity to move some of these issues forward.
Hi, this is Naomi and Juliana from the County of San Diego. We are in the process of developing our county food system standards. Sustainability is one of the 3 focus areas that we are including. I typed in a question, but I was wondering, curious actually, if anybody else is working on standards having issues with the correctional staff getting on board.
Oh, that's interesting. No, I mean I haven't heard much about that. Other than, of course, there's always issues around price. I think that's the issue that we hear most from public entities when we engage them on procurement. I've been involved with procurement issues for many years, going way back, and that always seems to be the issue. And I think that's what's kind of exciting about the focus on the less and potentially better meat and more plant proteins. It can be a lot cheaper and healthier than factory farm meat. So that's one way to address the price issue. But I think I know that there's some great folks doing work on like in correctional facilities and things, but I don't have that much experience on that. I can connect you with somebody who does a lot of work with prisons around food and agriculture, but not necessarily procurement.
Yeah, if you
picking up on that.
Sorry, that would be great if you could send us any contacts that you have. That would be great. Thanks.
And picking up on that, there was a question about if as part of the resources we're going to make available, anything that will promote both the water and cost savings of reducing meat consumption. I thought that was a really interesting point, Kari, on the affordability of not buying as much meat. Do you guys have resources around that, or is that something we might need to generate ourselves?
This is something that we'll be working on, and I think I'd like to check with the Meatless Monday folks to see how much they've been tracking that, because there are a number of school districts who have been implementing Meatless Mondays, entirely meat-free meals, although a lot of them are replacing meat with dairy, which dairy is actually, from an environmental standpoint, can be a lot more damaging than some of the other meats, particularly poultry. So. But nevertheless, I think there could be some data generated from all of the entities that are involved with Meatless Mondays. So I'm really interested in gathering that data. But no, we don't have anything specific. I think you can point to just the costs of particularly legumes and grains versus meat. I think there's a question about cooking. Of course, there's always issues around preparing foods, and often plant-based foods require more cooking and more experience with making dishes. So that can be an issue for some institutions. It is all a little bit complicated, of course.
And one of our other partners on this, Healthcare Without Harm, may have some cost data because they've been doing work with hospitals to encourage them to purchase less and better meat. But I don't think they have the combined water and costs, so maybe that's something we can look to do a little extra analysis of current data they have or something like that in the future.
Great, thank you. And I'll volunteer the Public Health Alliance to work with you guys to kind of dig up and make available those resources, or or create something that's going to work for our participants here today. I did see there was a question. Christina Hall, I believe you're on the line and you had a question. Do you want to come off of mute and ask us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So in our communities, we've seen that drought mitigation strategies were put in place and letters sent out to homeowners regarding when they can water, how long they can water, and we are seeing stresses in our communities and it's impacting food security because the trees and the gardens aren't getting enough water, so that the fruit and vegetable plants and trees are dying now. And so we're gonna try and meet with our legislators and local decision makers to try and get them to tweak their requirements a bit. But does anyone know if this conversation's being taken on at a state level, where like they said, okay, you can wash your car as long as you have a nozzle, but you can't water, your trees or your garden the way it needs to be watered? Like, does anyone know anything from that perspective, like if there's some bigger conversations going on?
This is Becca. I'm on the East Coast, so I have to go to Kari for that one.
Yeah, no, I don't know of bigger conversations, but I just point out the irony of it all, because it's just not, you want to be using the water to grow healthy fruits and vegetables instead of using 500 gallons to get you a burger in your, for food. So it just is illustrative of some, misguided directions. And I think more needs to be done on the efficiency side too with California agriculture. There's still a lot of work that can be done to make agriculture more efficient so that we don't have to stop watering our gardens that are growing food for us.
It is great that you plan to talk. Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, Tree People, they're based in LA. Maybe they might have some information. You can contact them. I'm sure they would know anything on that issue. And then there's also great methods. I think this goes back, to the previous webinar. We're discussing, bringing on board experts on urban planning and permaculture, because there are great methods to mitigate water usage on trees and other, edible landscapes that we're just not utilizing. So.
This is Mei Ling from San Francisco. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection has started to issue some announcements saying that it is okay to appropriately water trees, especially because trees that are dying become a public safety hazard. So there is statewide effort to tell people to water at least trees, if not food crops.
Great, thank you. That's really insightful and wonderful to hear from you all out in the audience with wonderful insights and responses on all of this stuff. I'm looking at the clock and we have hit 3 o'clock. Unfortunately, we haven't made it through all of the questions, but we will follow up with you all on these. We have those of you who registered, we have your email addresses to follow up on some of these points, and we'll also be posting everything on our website and can flesh out some more robust responses and put some resources up there as well. And then Naomi, I'll just give you a moment to close us out.
Great, thanks everybody for joining the call today. And again, I encourage you to email Holly questions or solutions, ideas, and she'll go ahead and send that out to the group. Again, thanks to Kari and Becca. A great conversation. Just a plug, one thing you can do is, as an individual, go talk to your elected officials about the dietary guidelines and keeping the sustainability section in. Even if you do not have a process as a professional, do encourage you as an individual to do that. And thanks everybody. I hope you join the rest of the webinars that have been planned, and I look forward to continuing in the conversation.
Great, thank you so much.